connection for you? Can you hear and communicate with us?
Yeah, I can hear you now. I wasn't able to hear you.
That's great. Okay, in that case, I think we're gonna go ahead and get started with the meeting. I'm gonna call the meeting to order at 6:03 p.m. I'd like to announce that this meeting is being recorded, and we will do a roll call.
Okay, Director Brandt?
Here.
Director Bertrand?
Here.
Director Geis?
Here.
Director Freeman?
Here.
Director Hedges? I thought he was here. He's here.
Here.
Director Thurlow?
Here.
And Director Nguyen. I think she's here.
Okay. Before we begin, we'd like to acknowledge the Chumash people, who are the traditional custodians of this land. We pay our respects to the Chumash elders, past, present, and future, who call this place, Anascoyo, the land the Isla Vista sits upon, their home. We are proud to continue their tradition of coming together and growing as a community. We thank the Chumash community for their stewardship and support, and we look forward to strengthening our ties as we continue our relationship of mutual respect and understanding. With that, we're going to go to the consent agenda. Do any directors have any items that they would like to pull from the consent agenda?
Yes, Spencer. If we could approve the balance with the exception of 2.4 and vote on that separately, just because I'm on the board of directors of Standing Together to End Sexual Assault, but I can vote for everything else on there. So I would like to move to approve the consent agenda with the exception of item 2.4.
Okay, there's been a motion made by Bertrand. There's been a second by Freeman. Is there any public comment? Okay, we will go to a roll call vote.
Director Brandt?
Yes.
Director Freeman?
Yes.
Director Thurlow?
Yes.
Director Bertrand?
Yes.
Director Hedges? Director Hedges? I can't hear you.
Yes.
And Director Geis?
Yes.
Director Nguyen will be on in a second, she just said.
Great. Okay, motion passes 6-0 with one absence. Does anyone have a motion for item 2.4?
I will move the approval of the 2020 to 2021 agreement with Standing Together to End Sexual Assault for Survivor Resource Center.
And a motion made by Freeman. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by, was that Geis?
Yep. Yes.
All right. Any public comment? Okay, we will move to a roll call vote.
Director Brandt?
Yes.
Director Freeman?
Yes.
Director Hedges?
Yes.
Director Geis?
Yes.
Director Thurlow?
Yes.
I think that's everybody voting on this.
All right, motion passes. With that, we're going to move to the public comment period. This is the time for members of the public who wish to speak on items that are not on our agenda to make their comments. If you have comments for items that are on our agenda, just wait until that item and we will have an opportunity for comment on each of our agenda items as well. Are there any members of the public that wish to speak on matters not on our agenda? Okay, I'm seeing none. And so with that, I will close the public comment period. Okay, we're going to move to item 4.1, the police brutality and anti-racism work group update. So I want to thank the board for passing the resolution that we considered at our last meeting to condemn racism and police brutality and declare racism a public health emergency. I think it was a really bold and important step for us to take to really position our organization as an anti-racist organization, not just an organization that is believing the right things, but is also actively being anti-racist. And so we have a report out from our work group, which includes myself, Director Bertrand, and Director Freeman. We've had a number of discussions that are detailed in the report about our next steps moving forward. And I wanted to highlight a couple of those. The first is in regards to our contracts. And as you'll see on the next agenda item, we have a contract extension that we are going to be voting on. This is an extension for 60 days in order to allow us time to negotiate with the University of California to include some measures within the agreement that includes strong anti-racist language and provisions in those contracts. So that's the first thing that we've discussed. We've also taken a broader look at some of the challenges with the current way that the law enforcement system is set up, and looked at models that have been employed across the country that have really been successful at moving things in a harm reduction oriented approach. One of those is the CAHOOTS program in Eugene, Oregon, which puts mental health workers and clinicians out there in the field, dedicated by themselves, not even with law enforcement presence, just by themselves to go and respond to some of these mental health and substance abuse related calls for service that come in. With that program, they've been able to reduce the number of calls for service that law enforcement has to respond to by 20%. And it has been a big success. It saves the city a lot of money because of the fact that the program is able to be more efficient than a traditional law enforcement agency might be. So I think it's programs like these that we need to look to in order for us to model a potential program for Isla Vista and Santa Barbara County off of. We've also discussed the role of organizations like the Guardian Team, which we got to work with in designing the festival, the Spring Festival this past year. We were able to see that their presence makes a profound difference when it comes to keeping an area safe, particularly at these festivals, but really thinking broadly to see if there's a role for an organization like the Guardians in more everyday security is something that was brought up by many members of the public during the process to create the Spring Festival, and is something that I think that we should be looking at. So we discussed that a little bit as well. Overall, I think the vision that I think our working group shares is for an Isla Vista where some of these non-violent calls for service don't have to be responded to with an armed law enforcement officer. I think that this will be a huge step in progress towards building the relationships of trust and the bonds of trust with the community, with each other that we need. And we can do it in a way where our community continues to enjoy a high level of safety. And I think it's really incumbent that we've heard loud and clear that the current system is not just racially biased, it is racially oppressive towards Black and brown people. And it has led to a cycle where Black and brown folks are overrepresented, not just in our jails and in our arrest statistics, but in the types of people that law enforcement agencies are trying to police when they're out there on the ground. And I think it's important to say that. We also talked about the Sobering Center. This is something that many of you are familiar with from the efforts that happened a couple of years ago to try and divert some of the folks that are arrested for substance-related issues, minor in possession, drunk in public, those types of crimes, and to try and divert them from the justice system and to an area where they can safely sober up and then go on about their business. In the past, we've also talked about there being sort of a restorative justice class attached to services at the Sobering Center. I think overall, it's just really important for us that we try and find all of these areas in our community that the criminal justice system is attached to in one way or another, and ask ourselves, is the criminal justice system the appropriate one to be responding to these issues? And when the criminal justice system does respond, is it making a difference in a positive way? Or is it perpetuating these cycles that we've talked about here today? So I think that's sort of some of our reports, and I'll defer to our other working group members if they have anything that they'd like to add on to this report and state for our discussion here tonight. I'll go ahead to Jay.
Yes, so one of the items that's listed on the report is, of course, the because it was one of the goals of the working group is to examine the amendments that I brought forward at the previous meeting. And so there has been more work that's been done on this, is taking into account more feedback from more groups, in addition to some feedback from the working group. The one that's attached to the agenda that was sent out on Saturday is an input to the committee. It is not an output of the committee. So it is, we've not yet brought a edited copy from the working group to the board. This is primarily the work of myself, as well as many of the people I've been working with. I've now received input from Healing Justice SB, for example. That is actually not, though, in the copy that was attached to the agenda on Saturday. They were only finally able to get back to me on late last night. And so I've been working on incorporating their updates. They have nothing substantive, in fact, actually nothing that they want to change in any of the resolution sections, but there were a few changes to the whereas clauses that they wanted to see additions, and a couple minor wording changes. Like one particular one was I kept swaying into using the term African American, and they wanted me to merely state black. There's one of the things that I've done is I've kind of gone further into the into the narrative, sometimes as carefully as I felt able to, but I can certainly go much deeper with relation to the Deltopia riots. And as I continued to integrate more and more of the research that I had found on that, I ended up discovering even more examples of essentially police escalation of violence, and that's where it's something that I care about particularly in a lot of this is that I feel like the process of using police to solve a lot of the problems that we have ends up leading to whether it be a conscious or a subconscious escalation of violence in a process. And so in the scope of doing that, I've now gone and read through various blogs of police trainers in order to try to get a better understanding of the thought process that they have with relation to how to best get police to disengage from scenarios rather than escalating the scenario. I'm very interested in trying to see where we can apply leverage in order to change the way that works in our local area. As far as some things that I think were actually maybe notable that people might not have known about. I mean, the last few weeks, and this is again something that I've kind of stated things like this before, but I mean, I feel some great shame for not knowing a lot of the things that I feel like I should have known and not taking action earlier on a lot of these topics. But I mean, one thing that I kind of wanted to highlight is the death of Megan Hockaday, who was a Santa Barbara resident and Santa Barbara High student who ended up getting murdered by police in Oxnard during the great domestic violence call. And I think that's one of the things that I've kind of seen in the pattern of a lot of the discussion about where a lot of the problems end up almost starting from is just a fundamental misuse of the police force by the community. And that's something that I've started to see also, even just looking at meetings that I attend locally. And so whether it be situations like the mirror bus guy, where for a long time, everyone was looking to the police, and the police were in an interesting situation of essentially explaining that, well, there's not much we can do. He's not doing anything outright illegal today, to finally something having been done, and then responses from even people like, our local community resource deputy, Justin, making the point that, well, I mean, I don't want you to think that you should be bringing these issues to us in the future. He just happened to do something illegal, and we happen to be able to do something about it. In the discussions that I've been able to have recently, in particular, a very heartfelt one with a few officers at the Goleta stakeholders meeting last week, Ariel and Gary Gaston. Looking at, I've actually felt an interesting amount of support from the idea that a lot of our officers in our area feel that they end up getting used for everything, whereas if you were to redirect resources that were being maybe wasted on using police to do things that should be done by social workers, having police doing things that should be done by mental health caseworkers, using police in order to solve things that should be done by maybe even the faith community was mentioned, it would be a better allocation of funds all around. And so that's kind of a lot of my interest in this is as far as like the defund the police efforts of trying to figure out how to take what has been an escalating and seemingly just piling on budget towards police services to solve all problems, and trying to figure out how to direct that money now towards the places where it would actually provide for each of the different problem areas the most benefit. I'm very interested in knowing from anyone else on the board any concerns that they have about the direction that this document that I've been working on has been going. Any questions that they have about clarifications. Maybe there's something about aspects of the wording that were confusing because of the terminology that's being used within various communities, causing all sorts of mismatches and clashes. I'd be happy to try to provide context for anything like that. And certainly I would love to take that feedback and incorporate it as I continue to work on what I kind of envisioning as the direction we should take, and the help that I've gotten in the community. So I always want to point out that I've gotten some really great feedback from people, including Andrew Johnson and Ryan Flake of Rising, and Rye Brennan, and now Simone from Healing Justice. And so actually, and I've got an opportunity to talk to the Vice Mayor of Berkeley, texted me earlier today in order to have a meeting with him tomorrow. So.
This is Dave from UCPD. I think the concept of addressing some of the things that may go on, and something that may be in line with the Whitebird Clinic Cahoots program is, the mental health crisis that the nation is suffering, and law enforcement is involved heavily in that in many different areas, because there's no one else to go. And no one has really any other options. And that can be definitely because of resources, money for county or municipalities. So I think some kind of formula to maybe look at different avenues, I think that's fantastic. I don't know how it can be accomplished, but I think everyone has read literature, even in our own on things of the mental health burden in some ways, the way it's been phrased, that's been put on law enforcement. And I think, even some of our local leaders in law enforcement have mentioned that, jails are not mental health clinics. And so anything that can be done, I think in that area might be, that might be a worthwhile endeavor to look at those things, especially with the Cahoots program, with what they seem to be in is, kind of a mental health crisis worker type field that could respond to the calls and maybe get the person the help that they need, which doesn't necessarily need to be jail every time.
Thank you for your comments. I wanted to go over to, I don't know if I see a hand from Director Bertrand. I'll go to you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I'll start off by just saying again that I'm just so grateful and impressed by all of the community advocates and activists who are really leading this discussion, especially our Black and Brown community members. There's an energy to this that just continues to build, and it's been very powerful to hear both the lived experiences of community members and how that shapes their policy aspirations, and also just all of the visioning that's occurring right now for how can we see different possibilities for the future. The first thing I'll say on that is I think it's really important that in all reform efforts that are done. And I think we're doing a very good job with this in our district. But any reform efforts that are done right now really need to be done through an equity lens. It's important that our district and other local governments and agencies and community partners are all working to deliberately confront structural racism. And I know that that can be difficult for some organizations to talk about when they haven't done it before or when it's still something new. But that's really what our community is calling on us to do. So I want to thank everyone on this board and our staff as well, because we are really being deliberate in being anti-racist and supporting Black Lives Matter, which I appreciate. I definitely echo a lot of the comments before from Director Brandt and Director Freeman. Additionally, I think that we have a very unique situation here in Isla Vista, given our demographic of being a diverse community of lots of young people and also many longer-term residents, as well as many families with young kids. And looking at the unique ways that our policing agencies interact with our community, I think presents a lot of opportunities for us to do things different, to do things better, and to really bring together community members, public safety officials, and community partners to create what could be a model for better policing and better safety of communities like ours. I think too, in that regard, one example is how we handle our alcohol and drug issues in this community. Every year we see so many people in our community being arrested or cited for various offenses related to personal alcohol or drug use. Whatever we can do there to divert people from criminal sanctions as a result of that, I think is a great first step. And one way we might be able to do that, I've been thinking about this a bit, is how do we get more alcohol and drug counselors out in Isla Vista on the weekend nights to be responding to calls with law enforcement officers, where a first contact is made by someone who's a trained professional with alcohol and drug expertise who can help young people who happen to be in an emergency or in a state of impairment. That's just one example of how we can think about doing things differently, in addition to what Director Freeman and Director Brandt mentioned. So I definitely am supportive of these continued discussions. I also want to mention that I'm glad to see that we are already in our contracts with law enforcement agencies working to make sure that we have in our agreements provisions on promoting racial equity. I think that's really important. And I'm excited to see what we can do from here. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Bertrand. I'm going to open it up for additional public comments. Does anyone have a comment on this item?
I'd like to mention one thing.
I'm going to go in the order of which I saw people. So I'm going to go to Lauren, I'm going to go to Andy, and then to Carmen.
Thank you.
Spencer, can I, as a board member, can I get in there somewhere? You didn't ask for further board comments.
Yeah, sorry, George. So we'll come back to you after our public commenters.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Lauren, Andy, and then Carmen.
Hello, board and members of the public. I came here today in support of Black Lives Matter, and I want to just touch on some things. It was really great to hear about the working group looking for alternatives to sending somebody with handcuffs and a gun to show up on calls that are not violent in nature. I would challenge people to think about ways in which we deem certain behavior as criminal, and the way we criminalize groups of people, whether that's based on skin color, as we're seeing really come to the forefront right now after a series of horrific murders and continuous murders, but also ways in which we criminalize poverty and homelessness, mental health, and these sorts of things, because the best way to deal with people who are experiencing poverty or issues of mental health is also not sending someone with a gun and a pair of handcuffs to shoot them off of private property. And I think really when we look at policing in this country, it boils down to a historic set of values in which we place private property over human life. I think it's really great that we're looking for alternatives to, sending police out on some types of calls. The solution, looking for solutions within reforming police, where we want to have provisions for promoting equity within police departments and things like that. I don't think it's worked in other places. If you look for examples in larger cities where they have engaged in community policing, this hasn't led to a decrease in arrests or a decrease in the population in prisons. It's led to increased funding for police. And I think as long as we're funneling more money into police departments and we're renewing contracts or putting more money into those contracts, we're going to see a continuation of funneling people into prisons. Thank you for your time.
Lauren. Up next, we have Andrew.
Yeah, I just wanted to start off by saying that I see that y'all are moving in the right direction. I see that. I appreciate it. I'm thankful for it. However, you cannot say that you are committed to values such as anti-racism when you continue to subsidize a repressive force that our own students, particularly Black, POC, other marginalized communities, have reported via statistics that make them feel unsafe. That there is evidence within Santa Barbara that we are not an enclave of racial equity, but that our police force here in Santa Barbara target marginalized communities, Black communities, more often and at a disproportionate amount than white affluent communities. I think generally, I don't think that what I've seen, even though I've seen a lot of great stuff, that there's been a full accounting of how Isla Vista itself has been a fee farm for the county and for police. The federal government, Eric Holder's Department of Justice, in their report on Ferguson, said that they engaged in a systematically racist form of policing as plunder. And that is not just Ferguson alone, but it is endemic of police departments throughout the county. And I think that there's a lot of work that can be done on trying to not just put on a public relations and make police appear to be better, but to actively transform the way that we are maintaining accountability within our own cultures. So there's been a lot of conversations about first responders, mental health first responders, about maybe having people who are trained in alcohol, substance abuse. And I think that there is a lot of support for the CSO program and for other initiatives like sort of a student-led efforts to try to respond to noise violations before police. The one thing that I want to say about this generally is the details of this matter. Separation and autonomy has to be prioritized. If an alcohol first responder is there with a police officer, how is that not going to lead into public intoxication charges for that person? If CSOs are going to be prioritized in the area, at what point in time are they an actual community-based organization? And at what point in time are they being directed and organized by the UCPD? These are sorts of questions that I really expect the board to think about seriously. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. Next up, I have Carmen.
Hi again. I've spent about 40 years being an activist in Isla Vista. A lot of that time was dealing with police community relations. And it seems like the task force you put together is working in the right direction. I would like to point out an article I read not more than 2 weeks ago, maybe 3, where the sheriff has 3 hacks of police and mental health workers working in the county. 2 in South County and 1 in North County. And the article, and I can't remember if it was in the Independent or Newshawk or Ed Hat, which are my 3 sources, was very positive that everybody involved thought that was really a great move forward. So it seems like the sheriff anyways is already moving in the direction that some of you are suggesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. I'm going to go back to the board. Sorry for those members that didn't have a chance to comment before I open public comment. And I'm going to go over to George.
Okay, am I on speak? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Quick question to members of the work group. Did you have a public meeting or was this a private meeting where you discussed these items?
So we also had a brief discussion with the Isla Vista Community Network in addition to our own internal discussions. And we anticipate, I think, doing some more outreach to other community groups in the future.
Okay, so this report is really just based on the 3 of you and some input you got from certain community members. I mean, I think that's okay, sort of, but if we were doing a subdivision down on the edge of Isla Vista, it probably wouldn't fly. But I certainly would want to see us have some more broad community input as we go forward. You know, my quick comment is simply this. You know, we do the one group of people that do not want to be responding to mental health issues are the police, and the one group of people who are most likely to get killed on the job are police that respond to domestic violence disputes. And you know, we just need to keep in mind that the world is a complicated place. And we're not going to send a mental health worker to a domestic dispute, even though that would seem like that would be a good idea. You know, the other night, 2 nights ago, there was in my neighborhood at 4 a.m. in the morning, a guy with a 2x4 running around, yelling at the top of his voice and banging on various parts of the neighborhood with his 2x4. I mean, as we discuss all these things, let's keep that in mind. That's the reality. That's me. That's what I'm thinking. Am I going to call a mental health person at 4 in the morning to confront a guy with a 2x4? And last but not least, it kind of bothered me that in the proposed amendments to Resolution 20.9, there was a case brought up of a community member who died, Isla Vista, and it was somehow this was thrown into this mix. I really think that when we go to do stuff like this, we need to rely on real data, not on legend. That particular person, the public record clearly shows that the legend on the street of police, whatever you want to call it, was wrong. And most important, that person did not die in the manner in which even the news media indicated. And I would suggest people check the public record autopsy reports to determine. We need to, as a governing board, not be inflaming our constituents with very erroneous information about how people die on the streets of Isla Vista. End of comment. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to comment.
And sir, thank you, Director Thurlow. I'm going to go to Director Hedgers.
In the particular case that was just addressed there, I have wept debriefing with emergency medical personnel and law enforcement personnel in the aftermath of that particular incident. And that was not as portrayed in the legends that were told about it. And there are consequences of any of us entering into a crisis situation, just as there are consequences of sending a soldier to war. I have responded in many crisis situations over the last few decades, both with law enforcement and as an employee of county mental health. Sometimes I've been co-located and collaborative, and sometimes I've responded myself. One of the questions we used to ask as an EMT before we even went in was, is the scene safe? And the fact is in this kind of crazy world we're in, there are unsafe scenes. And the question becomes, do we self-sacrificially enter that unsafe scene to try and do the best we can, or do we wait for backup? And sometimes backup is necessary. We're in a time right now with all of those things that have come to the forefront that anger us, that break our hearts, that embarrass us, that make us feel guilty as a nation, and that must change. And we all want to say Black Lives Matter right now. My board with Santa Barbara Street Medicine, Doctors Without Walls, just passed a resolution last night declaring that systemic racism is a public health crisis. And we went on to describe a little bit about what that meant. Now, one of the difficulties right now with all of our passions is that we tend to bundle things with our passions. We bundle multiple past anecdotes, and there are multiple past anecdotes. I do not diminish or demean any of them. But there is a point where we have a presenting problem that we could build some agreement about. And the resolution, as briefly constructed, is like a lot of resolutions being passed all around the country. And there is agreement from the heart, a lot of times through tears, with a lot of law enforcement folks. Here again, I've wept with a lot of them. And they want this to stop too. There's nobody that's more angry about a bad cop than a good cop. And don't bundle all of them, because some of them are an ally in this. And the good needs allies. And if we tribalize this, we have to, I'm not saying that our resolution in any way tribalizes this. but we don't want to overcomplicate it to the point where we can't all agree on the good. And there is a good we can all agree on. And, you know, just please don't overbundle all of our anecdotes together. We can't fix everything, but we can address the presenting issue that there is systemic racism. We can own that. We can confess that. And we can go on from there to do penance for that and to fix that.
Thank you for your comments, Director Hedges. Are there any other board members that wish to speak? Okay, so with that,
Yes.
I'm going to reopen. Oh, never mind,
there were two people with their hands up.
Okay, can't see everyone. I see Ethan.
Yeah, there's
Who's
Ethan
the
and
other
myself.
person with their hand up?
Myself.
Okay, so I'm going to go to Ethan and then Jay.
All right, thank you. Yes, I appreciate the comments of all the community members who spoke, as well as my colleagues. And the first thing I'll say is I hear you, Father John, the concern about, I believe you said, the battle of the tribes, or people in different groups pointing the finger at each other right now. And that's a very valid concern about polarization and how we're going to work together to move through this. But one thing I want to acknowledge is throughout the past couple of weeks, I've been really saddened when people have made this about Black people versus the police and this being a war on the police. And I'm not saying that this is something that's come up in this meeting, but I do want to call attention to that. I think rather how we have to look at this is right now, all of our attention needs to be focused on how we are going to better serve our communities of color. And law enforcement are part of that solution. When we reimagine how law enforcement operates in our communities, and when we better approach these vexing public safety issues we have. But in that regard, I really want to focus on how are we as a local government empowering our local law enforcement agencies to be the best allies to our communities of color. I think that's really the call to action that we have fundamentally at this time. How are we preparing our law enforcement agencies to be good allies? So ultimately, this is a moment that's about better serving our communities of color. Now, in response to Director Thurlow's comments about what he saw in his neighborhood, I totally appreciate that there are real public safety issues, both in Isla Vista and our surrounding communities. But when I look at the various issues that we're facing, whether they are mental health related, whether they are alcohol or drug related, poverty related, related to homelessness, law enforcement does have a role to play in a lot of these, but we also really need to think about when is it appropriate and when does it need to be used as a first option? Because there are a lot of situations that we see here in Isla Vista where we really should be focusing on how do we be better neighbors to this person? How do we make sure that this person is getting the support so that they are able to be safe in our community and so that they are able to respect the norms of our community? How are we able to resolve conflicts and issues that come up in a way that does not just throw the book at people, in a way that does not just focus on retribution and incapacitation, but also focuses on rehabilitation and reconciliation and restorative justice? That's really what I want to focus on right now. As far as defund the police, that is something that I see the value in that campaign is it has woken a lot of people up about how much money we spend on law enforcement, and it has started a real conversation about how our communities can make sure that we're investing in other areas that promote public safety as well, and working with our law enforcement agencies to make sure that they're best equipped to focus on what is their responsibility. So I am grateful that that campaign is going on right now, and I'm grateful that we're having this discussion because I think there's a lot of community members who for the first time are thinking about these issues. So I know that there's various parts of this that we need to continue to discuss. We need to bring in more public members, but I am happy with the direction that we're going in general.
Thank you, Director Bertrand. I'm going to go to Director Freeman, and then I'm going to reopen the public comment.
There are a few points that I wanted to touch on here. One of them is this idea, which I entirely agree with. I entirely agree with the idea that we should be getting more public input on our reports, and I think that's also part of what we're doing today. I mean, it's just this didn't end up getting agendized to, for example, immediately put into place a resolution or to vote something in. It was agendized in order to allow us to have at the board level the discussion of these various topics. There were some recommended discussion items that were put together in the report from Spencer. I think that to the extent to which there are disagreements, and some of them were raised, and so I will discuss at least one of these in the amendments, first of all, and now the draft resolution that I put together. I mean, I think this is actually a big opportunity for us to try to bring forward this discussions that we were having in the smaller group and that we were having at the Isla Vista Community Network to now the public that attends our board meetings. I would love to do more. I don't disagree with this, but I do take issue in this idea that almost it sounds like, well, you know, you didn't get enough public input to bring it to the board. I mean, the board is our process for public input in some sense. I also wanted to look at this question then of the who do you send to a domestic violence dispute? And I appreciate the danger to police officers in situations where there's already danger, and the idea that if you send somebody who is maybe not prepared for violence, it's something. How do you deal with these scenarios? Like I appreciate the question there, but I guess I would counter with my own questions. I mean, so the story that I brought up earlier in this meeting, the one of Megan Hockaday, was one of a domestic dispute where the officer went to the situation and within 20 seconds of arriving at the scene had put 5 bullets in Megan. She had a knife. Now the question is that the appropriate response to a knife? Now there's lots of arguments, and there's lots of, this turns into, you know, court cases, things like that, and the extent to which was enough scrutiny put on it at the time. I don't think so. And nor does a very large community people think so. And to this day, I mean, there's people showing up at city council, you know, fighting and arguing about the situation in Oxnard. But I say this because it's that there's something about having somebody who's extremely trained in understanding that area. That is important. And to the extent to which we take somebody whose primary job is to deal with violent crime and to send them into that situation, and the idea that then something violent ends up happening, it seems not surprising to me. And so something is broken there that I think that we need to work on. And that's where I start to think, well, what is the history of interactions there? Maybe there needs to be briefings that occur with relation to watching these sorts of, there's just so much to unpack. And that's why, like, But I feel like there's almost this oversimplification of the idea that, like, well, that's violent, therefore we have to send a police officer. And so it's a little bit too easy for me. But then the final one that I really want to poke at is that so there's been multiple now complaints about one particular example that I used in my document. And I want to read the wording that I wrote, because I mean I've tried to be very careful, and actually to the point of just being, I mean, like I sometimes sit around and I agonize over each one of these clauses for like a half hour trying to figure out the wording for it. And I could have, and in fact, when I originally had thought of it, I mean, I'll say, try typing in rumors. That's not what I'm trying to do, right? And so the wording that I put there was, whereas in 2015, concerns were raised surrounding the death of Andres Esteban Sanchez by a number of community members due to outstanding racial tension. And I want to unpack that, because I don't think anything in that statement is false, first of all. And actually, I provided more citations for this item than I did many of the other items, even remotely related to this sort of item. Concerns were raised, and the source of those concerns seems to be outstanding racial tension. Now, I'm not, in the wording of that clause, stating that something problematic happened. Now, and I want to say that I'm not saying that anything did not, but I'm not stating anything did. And in fact, when you actually look at all of the detailed analysis of who did what, everything, you look at all of the testimony that was given, it wasn't just police that were there as the first responder, and it wasn't even just police that were being looked at problematically. I mean, there were complaints about the EMTs. There were complaints about the reason why I think that this example is an important one, and the reason why I would then defend the idea of bringing it up, and the reason why I think that shying away from examples like this and saying that, oh, this is a little bit too controversial of a conclusion, therefore we don't want to talk about it, is that I think it really demonstrates the lack of trust and the existing tensions and the community members that were involved. I mean, these are people like Alexandra Melgoza, right, who were deeply connected and had a lot of good understanding of how all of these how the bureaucracies work and is involved in lots of really core nonprofit advocacy. This doesn't, when you look at this storyline of where were these feelings coming from, I think that's what really kind of makes for a powerful local narrative, that it's no, we're fine here. It's like, no, we're so not fine here that this death occurs and suddenly we have, like, it is like all hands on deck and all sorts of different organizations trying to figure out, because of so much racial tension. And so that's why, I mean, I defend the inclusion of the thought. I also defend my wording of it. I'm perfectly happy with the idea that, maybe even after I spent some time trying to come up with something that was accurate, maybe you want to change the wording some more. But I guess the knee-jerk reaction to the idea of, oh, that's a controversial one, that's not the police doing something horribly wrong, therefore we're not going to include it as part of an explanation for why we're examining the problem space, I think is a little bit strong and maybe a little bit weirdly motivated. I guess it's difficult for me to separate some of that, but that's my thought process there.
Thank you for your comments, Director Freeman. I'm going to reopen public comment and go to a couple of people who have been patiently waiting. First, I'm going to go to Julia, and then next, I'm going to go to Ash.
Hi, thank you all for your time. I just wanted to make a brief comment. I'm really glad to hear about the ideas of defunding the police and redirecting those funds towards more programs that would focus on harm reduction and community safety and health. And I do think actually that abolishing the police as a long-term goal is a valid goal to have, especially because it's not an indictment of any individual police member or their personal beliefs or their personal goodness, but rather an indictment of the system as a whole, and considering how the prison industrial complex does not serve society or does not actually, create good, but rather simply, criminalizes people, damages communities, only brings money to corporations, etc. But my actual comment is thinking about and moving towards what I think is absolutely the correct direction of thinking of alternatives to policing and mental health responders and, drug and alcohol counselors, that is a really good thing to be doing. I think that also it's really important to be continuing to examine the institutional racism within those institutions as well, and thinking about within the field of social work, in what ways is that field racist as well, and in what ways are people of color being more frequently forced into psychological institutions instead of and I don't have as many statistics off the top of my head, but I would love to continue seeing this conversation happen, because there's a lot of the racism isn't just within the police, it's within a lot of the different structures that are happening. And so just being able to be sure that whatever the replacement is, that there's a lot of accountability in that group as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Julia. Okay, next I'm going to go to Ash.
Hi, thank you. So I wanted to say thank you for taking the time to have this conversation. That an important part of restorative justice is acknowledging that the police don't do a good job of addressing crimes. If somebody, so most crime happens by someone people already know. Like if your friend who's a drug addict steals your sound system, you would probably hesitate to call the police. You would probably handle it more directly. Our police system doesn't do a good job of redressing crimes. And when someone does a harm to another person, you know, that needs to be addressed and reparations and stuff. So I'm wondering if we ever ask our law enforcement to prove that they're effectively facilitating justice, and when they're not, what would it look like for that to be handled in the community? And that's what I got for now. Thanks.
Thank you, Ash. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak?
Spencer, did you miss me? George.
Looking for members of the public, but thanks, George. I don't see anyone. Yell at me if I miss someone, but I don't think there's any other public commenters. Okay, I'm going to bring the discussion back to the board, and I think, George, you have something you'd like to say.
Just real quick, because I think it's only fair that since I'm being called a knee jerk, emphasis on jerk. Jay, I would only say this: read the autopsy report and then move on from this. I'm just saying this is incredibly inflammatory, incredibly divisive for this really sad story to be used as an example of racial tensions in our community. And again, I would only say this: you are an academic, you're a scientist. Read the autopsy report, okay? Thank you.
I had wanted to put in one final thing.
I'm going to go over to Director Freeman.
Okay.
I guess I am once again going to state that when you're looking at tensions, it's just really not about what happened in some sense. And so if you're telling me that the autopsy report will tell me that students didn't show up saying that they felt that there were a bunch of racial biases, if you're telling me that the autopsy report will tell me that there that no one was concerned about this, if you're telling me that the autopsy report will tell me that people didn't feel a certain way going into the situation, but that doesn't make any sense to me. And so again, I'd chosen to word it in a way where it wasn't to state that, whereas in 2015, Andre Esteban Sanchez was left to die by police officers. I mean, like, certainly, I mean, the level of strength of wording I've used in this document, if I even remotely believed that, I would have directly said that. Not to say that if I felt that I had the evidence to claim it, I would go ahead and state it. Now, not to say that it didn't happen, because I don't, but if the autopsy report says it doesn't happen, great. I didn't claim it did happen, right? I didn't say it did happen. The thing that I think is really important to look at here, and that's why, like, if we want to change the wording of this in order to make it even more oblique, if we want to figure out a way of trying to, the reason why I think that this story is important is because it demonstrates just how many people going into the conversation, before it even started, police show up at the scene, and there were already people who were there concerned about what was about to happen due to existing racial tensions. And we have so many beautiful stories that came out of that, of people, well, beautifully horrific stories of people coming out of that situation, talking about issues that they had had before with police, feelings that they had had during that situation. And I just, the idea of just kind of discounting all of it because, well, maybe they were wrong. That's why, like, I wasn't trying to state what happened there. I was trying to explain the feelings that people have about their experiences with police, trying to look at the extent to which it's not the idea that, oh, you know, people in Santa Barbara, people in Isla Vista don't think that the police are racist. No. We had person after person after person thinking this. Now, where did those thoughts come from? I think it comes from something very deep and long-standing. And that's why I put that there. But again, I'm not like, if we want to tweak the wording on it, I you know, and if in the end we end up deleting it, that's cool. But I just the idea of just saying that, like, oh, well, you know what, you're saying something's wrong. I mean, please read the wording that I actually put there. Read
it. I did.
Thank you, Director Freeman. I'm going to go to Director Hedges. And then I'm going to go to Director Bertrand.
I have one small thing to say. The words that we use have consequences. We must choose them well in an explosive moment in particular. To bring up in any way an explosive situation from the past and co-locate it with the current situation, it destroys, it poisons the entire statement for me. I myself was assaulted by a man on the same drug that Andres was on. And we ended up using law enforcement in a restorative way to get him, to attempt to get him back into the university. And I would have done the same for Andres had we had the chance, but because of, and that's not just me, that's not just me. Our words matter in this moment. Those words, in any way to invoke an anecdote. We have a president who suggests things, who says, I'm not saying, I'm just saying, you tell me. That's what this is too. I can't stand with it.
I'm going to go to Director Bertrand.
Yes, thank you. So one thing I'll mention is since, and this has been a thought when I've looked at Director Freeman's document, is there's a couple examples of different events that have occurred in the community or in the area. But I think in general, in addition to what's already there, we want to gather data. We want to know what our community's experience with law enforcement is. We've heard many accounts, and we want to gather more information too. And I think that that's hearing directly from the community about their interactions, whether they be positive, negative, neutral. What are their reactions? So I would propose that we also look into some way for having that community input process where we solicit what are your experiences with law enforcement and public safety services in Isla Vista, and how would you recommend improving them? I mentioned this too because I know a lot of us individual board members have been reached out to by different members of the community. And if we were able to have a process where people could provide this input, and ultimately it's used in a constructive manner to make improvements to our system, I think that that would be really fantastic. Additionally, right now we're hearing a lot of calls for greater civilian oversight. And while our district doesn't have that power, this would be a way for us to at least collect more of the community's voice and provide that input, and also help us inform how we are contracting for policing services. So that's something that I'll put out there. As far as the specific items in Director Freeman's document, I look forward to seeing how it's continued to be put together and edited. And I think that any members of the board who also have items that they want to put forward, please put them forward. I know I'll be doing the same. And I think that it takes all of us to really shape this conversation in this direction that we go. This is a critical issue. This is one of the main issues that we as a district were formed to address. Systemic issues and generational issues in Isla Vista about public safety and mistrust between those who are here to protect us and those who live here. I also want to close by saying that I do know that there are a lot of partners in law enforcement in Isla Vista who do care a lot about these issues. And I want to call on them to also reach out to us to let us know how we can support their efforts to grapple with this current situation, so that we can at least know where they're coming from as far as what they see are some steps that should be taken in Isla Vista right now. It really is going to take all of us to work together to make a difference. So I'm looking forward to that effort.
Thank you for that, Director Bertrand. I think I'll close just by saying that someone said recently that states that we can never underestimate the importance of words. I think Director Hedges made this point just a couple of minutes ago. And I wholeheartedly agree that there is something very important and profound about us stating what our values are, putting them down on paper, as we've done with the resolution last week and as we will continue to do with the forthcoming resolution. At the end of the day, I think what's really important is, where do we go from there? Where do we go once we've identified these problems, and how are we going to be able to move forward towards a system and a model that actually works for the people that we're trying to protect and serve? And ultimately, that's what I'm most excited about. And I welcome, I think I echoed Director Bertrand's comments that we welcome input from everyone in the community from what your experiences are with law enforcement and the justice system as a whole. One of our public commenters mentioned that racism is not something that is exclusive to law enforcement. It is present in all of our many structural systems. And I think it's important that we hear about that when it exists as well. And we also want to hear from law enforcement as well about how they think that we can move forward and how we can be allies when there are law enforcement entities that are trying to move the ball in the right direction. And so I appreciate everyone who has spoken today. While this is just an update for now on our work group and our existence, we will continue to bring updates to our board on this and bring the resolution to the board as well very soon in order for us to have a vote on that. And overall, really encourage everyone on the board to really grapple with these issues, because our community demands it. This is the single largest issue, I think, since any of us have taken office, where we have heard really unanimous community calls for us, and when I say us, I mean the collective us, everyone who is a public decision maker, to do something. And I think that we need to rise to the occasion and heed those calls. I'm going to go to Director Bertrand, and then I'm going to go ahead and close the discussion.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night, Carmen. One more thing that I'll mention, and I hope this is helpful for people who are listening. I've been doing a lot of self-reflection too during this time, and living in Isla Vista for 6 years. And Jay, you've lived here for longer. Jonathan, you've lived here for longer. Father John, you've lived here longer than any of us. There have been a lot of emergency situations. There have been times when I've seen emergencies, and there have been times when I've called the police. And I've been thinking about those incidents, and I've been thinking about when I've picked up the phone and called the police, when was the response that took place needed? And in some of those times, the response that took place was what was needed. But there were other times too when I thought about, could this have gone a different way? And I encourage us all to have those conversations with ourselves and use that to help us make sense of this situation. Because ultimately, folks on the ground level, how our community interacts with our public safety system, that makes a big difference as well. I've also thought about times when there have been serious crimes in Isla Vista. And I've thought about how we as a community, how we react to what should happen, or how we think about what happened and how it should be addressed. And I think that that's something that also requires us to reflect on, just looking at what has happened and where we want to go. So I'll close with that. Thank you.
Hello, is everyone muted?
Spencer, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. I was just saying that with that, I will go ahead and close the discussion. I really appreciate everyone for providing their input and looking forward to continuing the conversation at a future meeting. We're going to go to item 4.2, which is the interpersonal violence investigator contract amendment, which we've spoken about a little bit already, but I want to hand it over to Jonathan to add anything about this contract amendment.
Spencer. This is George.
Yes, George.
I have to recuse myself. I just had one quick question though. Was the CSO contract also up?
It's not up. Usually we do that one in August.
Okay, so somewhere I thought I saw that there was going to be a discussion of a 60-day extension on the CSO contract.
That's the interpersonal violence investigator.
Okay, but not the CSO. It's different. Okay. I'm going to step out. Jonathan, can you just text me when it's ready to come back? And Spencer, don't wait for me because you got a long agenda and I don't want to hold things up.
Cool. George, do you want us to just put you in the waiting room and,
what's the waiting room?
When you are usually joining a Zoom meeting, you are
okay. Yeah, put me in the waiting room.
Okay. I'll text you when we're done.
Okay. Thank you for doing that, Jonathan.
Yeah. Okay. I guess I had already started talking about this. I'm just getting my place back. So the point of this item is that this contract was coming up for renewal at the end of the month. And then we had a meeting in May where we talked about different goals that we'd like to, or we had a meeting in April where the board asked me to work with UCPD to come up with goals for the program in the next year, which we did. And then the board passed resolution 20-9, which had provisions about renegotiating parts of our law enforcement contracts on racial equity. And so the purpose of this item is to give a 60-day extension to this contract. And so it gives us time to incorporate that board direction on racial equity. So this amendment has the goals, though, that the board had asked me to work on. And I think this is the first time you're seeing them, but they're split between outreach and activities the interpersonal violence investigator does and the kind of data that they would report to us. But so it adds those in. But again, this is I don't want to call it a placeholder, but this is buying us time to be able to have that conversation without a deadline coming up in a week.
Thank you, Jonathan, for that explanation. I think this is a really important thing for us in order to preserve the continuity of the program, but also still be able to move towards our goals as we passed in the resolution from last week. And in general, continue to try and improve the interpersonal violence investigation program in a way that moves us towards better support for survivors, better data for us to figure out how to provide that support, and working towards really codifying an anti-racist program within the interpersonal violence investigation program. Are there any comments from board members? Okay, with that, I'll close board comment. We'll go to public comment. Are there any members of the public that wish to speak? Okay, I'm going to go to Andy.
Yeah, I actually wanted to start my public comment by sort of looping back a little bit. And in particular, I wanted to speak to Friar John. You were attacked in May of 2016. That was, I remember reading about that. I remember, caring about that. And I was doing participant observation of Isla Vista Foot Patrol during that time. I have a lot of interviews, a lot of field notes from that. May 13th, which was a Friday, right after you were assaulted, 4 o'clock in the morning, there was a call from the CSOs to the police department. The CSOs had restrained someone in a field, on UCSB's college campus. And the police officers responded to that, and then they sort of took over the responsibilities of the CSO. And there was a person there who was not intoxicated on alcohol. They were on drugs. They were on psychedelic drugs, and they were having a serious mental health crisis, and they were not themselves. And they were at a risk of being violent. And I was really hurt and frustrated about this because the police officers that were there told me point blank, we don't care about what they're on. And then they charged this person with a public intoxication. And then they continued to treat this person in a really aggressive and disrespectful way, as opposed to trying to calm them down and understand that they were having a really bad experience on these drugs. And it also really bothered me because this came a week right after your assault. And so I just wanted to use that story because I really kind of want to convince you to perhaps take seriously some of the more aggressive amendments that were being offered, precisely because the police demonstrated that they actually were not the people that were capable of responding to this incident. I remember feeling really conflicted because I thought, I consider myself a police abolitionist, but I was like, this person obviously needed to be treated. He needed to have someone be responded to. He was not in a good place. He was a risk to the community. He was a risk to himself. But the police were not the people there that cared about responding appropriately, effectively. And I remember it gave me a lot of ethical problems because I felt like it was, I could have done a better job. Any community member could have done a better job trying to handle that person's crisis at that moment. And so I just kind of wanted to give you that story because I don't know if you've ever heard that, because the police were uninterested in trying to, realize that maybe there was bad psychedelic drugs that were around town that were causing really violent episodes amongst people, and it was a risk to our community, and I feel that they failed in that instance. On the issue of the Detective Avila's salary, I've known Detective Avila for a long time. I have a lot of respect for her. I think that in general, interpersonal and sexual violence is the largest crime within our community, our campus community. That is shown by the stats, and I care about this issue. However, I do not think that the IV Community Service District should be subsidizing this position at close to $150,000 a year. That money can actually be spent in better ways. First of all, I think that Detective's position would actually be maintained, even if y'all stopped paying her salary. I've talked to officials within Students Against Sexual Assault, Associated Students, the Women's Center, and Title IX student advisor. And they think that there can be political pressure to make sure that that detective's position is maintained. I think that more substantially, I find it really troubling that, the IV Community Service District tax and budget that I've supported is being used to actually pay for police that repress me and repress my community. The UCPD's budget for just the Santa Barbara campus is $11 million. $11 million. They have the ability to fund Detective Avila's position if they want to, okay? The other thing is I think that this provides an opportunity for the Isla Vista Community Service District to provide a community-based alternative to policing and Title IX. And I think that that's what our community needs. And so I don't think that this will appear overnight, but I do think that there could be a phased approach in which this money could be better allocated to a survivor initiated program that was focused on reparative, preventative, and transformative justice, and that did not reproduce some of the problems that gendered violence reproduce via police institutions. And I really think that while I support Detective Avila, I support having someone within the police department that focuses upon this issue because it is a big issue for our community. That is not something that our community should be paying for, because our community should be trying to create alternatives to police and based upon different types of justice models. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for your comments. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to bring it back to our board. I'll go over to Ethan.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I want to thank our staff and UCPD for working together on this update. I think we're moving in a good direction with this. This program came out of the calls from the community, especially students against sexual assault, calling for greater attention to be paid to interpersonal violence and sexual assault in our community, not just on the enforcement side, but also the prevention side. I think that we've seen good progress in this program over the past year and a half or so. And when I think about where we're going with policing, we want to be focusing on how we're using law enforcement as a community partner to solve real vexing issues and problems. And interpersonal violence and sexual assault is something that has been an issue in many college communities, especially throughout this country. And I see this program as a way where we can work to make Isla Vista a best model for how we can address the horrible tragedy of sexual assault and interpersonal violence. So I am supportive about this. I know that we're still fine-tuning how this program operates. We want to continue to make it more community-oriented and continue to make sure that it's having the most reach it can. And I'm confident that Detective Avila and her team are the best folks to do it. So I'd like to thank staff and UCPD for working on this update, and I'm looking forward to supporting it.
To Director Bertrand. Any other board comments on this item? Okay, I think I'll just close, or I see a hand that I might have missed. I'll go to Director Freeman.
Yeah. I don't have much to say on this topic, but I thought that it was, this is always one of the complicated scenarios of trying to look at where funding comes from and the extent to which certain things are prioritized in the Sheriff's Department. This is certainly one of the things where it's interesting that we think about what are the places where we most want police here in Isla Vista, and we think about sexual assault, and we think about domestic violence. But now the question that I kind of have is, what percentage of the department's resources are being applied to it? And it seems, I mean, if nothing else, part of the reason why we ended up funding this position was because it was effectively nothing. I mean, the reason why we were looking into this was because there were demands from student groups and at the fact that they just felt like they were being completely ignored and weren't getting any resources from the department to me. And there's something broken about that with all of the money that is going to the Sheriff's Department, that in this case, we're and UCPD, I mean, it's both, right? I mean, it's all the money going to the Sheriff's Department and UCPD, although it was originally the Sheriff's Department's jurisdiction, which is why I say that somehow sexual assault isn't what they're spending their time on. And therefore, it's now beholden on us to provide supplemental tax money in order to make that happen. And the problem is that now if we don't fund it, I don't know if it's going to get funded at all. But I mean, it's almost this weird feeling of I just want to be like, well, can we fund this position and then like defund half of what they're currently doing? But yeah, is a really frustrating position to be in, wanting to have this one part actually happen and then being like, well, I guess it's the one part we're going to have to pay for, even though we're also getting stuck with the bill indirectly through the county, and in our perception and our inability to actually have self-governance for all of the other stuff that happens here that's being charged through the county budget. But, yeah.
Thank you, Director Freeman. I think I'll close discussion by just really saying a memory that I've had that really, I think, profoundly affected me, which was in 2017 when a number of students led a sit-in in the Chancellor's office to demand that resources and support for survivors of sexual violence. And the thing that affected and moved me the most was by just how many of my friends that were there with me also were survivors of sexual violence. And it really, I think, made me think about how sexual violence, gendered violence has been something that we've tried to sweep under the rug for far too long. Previous generations were not able to confront it. And I see in some ways parallels between the way that sexual and interpersonal violence was swept under the rug and the way that racism in our society was swept under the rug. And really, I think it's incumbent upon us to do what we can in whatever small way to try and right those wrongs and really try and better position the public safety system to be focusing on things like interpersonal and sexual violence. I think we've heard the report from Kavina and the UCPD at a couple of meetings ago that really outlined the great work that that program is doing, and I'm very fully prepared to support it. And I think importantly, to bring us back to what we're discussing today, this will allow us to be able to buy some time to come up with a strong anti-racist clause for this contract and follow in spirit with our resolution that we passed last week, which directs our staff to develop these clauses for our public safety related contracts. So I'm very supportive of this. And I want to thank Jonathan for putting this together and thank Ross as well on short notice. So
can I add
with that, I don't know. Yeah, I'm going to go over to Christy.
I just like to add on to what you said about how sexual violence and sexual assault has been swept under the rug for so many years, just like how racism is. But I'd like to emphasize how sexual assault is still swept under the rug till this day. And that's why defunding a program as crucial as this is the last thing that we want to do. It's something that a lot of survivors have to live in secrecy for most of their lives because they're afraid that they won't get any help from someone such as the investigator. And just having that resource in our own community where sexual assault is so prevalent, especially in Greek life and in college dorms, it's something that we need. And I feel like it's just something that is so crucial for us to understand that sexual assault is one of the most important and one of the most, I'd say, underrated things that people don't really look towards or people don't take as like something that's important in their lives because they don't see it as much and they feel like, and it's mostly because a lot of sexual assault survivors don't like to talk about it because they fear of being miscommunicated or they fear that that people say that they're lying, and there's so many issues that we can talk about more, but I just want to say that I'm fully supportive of this, and defunding something as important as this is something that should never be discussed.
Thank you, Christy. I'm going to go over to Father John.
This is definitely one of those instances where you want someone not just to go there to investigate and understand what happened and talk about it, but to have a pair of handcuffs on their belt.
Thank you for that, Father John. With that, I don't know if any other board members have discussion. I would also be ready to entertain a motion. Director Freeman?
One thing is, which is on this topic, so right now we're looking at doing a 60-day extension in order to try to get a clause related to trying to get something, don't be racist, right? I mean, it's an interesting thing to try to put into the contract. And so I'm really interested to see what exactly ends up happening on the negotiating team and Ross and things like that. I want to take a step back and point out that, I mean, I think that what will get really interesting is maybe not within the next 60 days, because that's not that long, but the next time this negotiation comes up, we were in a really interesting position because of the way that our law got worded that says that we're able to contract for additional police protection services from either the county sheriff or the University of California. And it put us in that amazing position of actually, I mean, the people even questioning, like, would they even how could they have that power? I mean, isn't this the sheriff's jurisdiction? And well, no, we can actually contract with UCPD. We can actually let UCPD have a little bit of almost lent jurisdiction, because we're supposed to be able to get public safety, and we're allowed to get it from them. I think that leverage is something that we might be able to use in the future in order to get something better. And that's why I would like to see us start thinking about how to take some of these contracts that we have and try to not make them all separate and piecemeal, but try to think about, like, what are we trying to get out of public safety in the area? And to the extent to which we are, there are things that we feel that we need to get from actual law enforcement. As Father John has said, the things where you feel you need to actually have somebody show up with handcuffs. As Christy said, the positions that we just actually consider to be so critically important, to try to figure out then how to allow us to, which of these two organizations is willing to make other changes in how we do local law enforcement, for example, and maybe then they're the person who we end up allocating our money towards for certain other positions that we want. And so then, we actually had this great, I mean, one of my favorite moments over the course of the last 4 years of being on this board was, or 3.5 years being on this board, was when we had the Sheriff's Department and the and UCPD show up at the same time and essentially argue with each other about who was going to be more qualified to take on this particular challenge. And the idea of having those two departments show up and argue with each other about who is going to be able to provide the best progressive public safety in the area, whether that be the things that they aren't doing now that they should be doing, or the things they're doing now and agree to stop doing. I think we're in a really interesting position with our contract negotiation power. And so today, I'm supportive of this idea of push it for 60 days and let's see if we can get some kind of cool, you're not going to be racist clause. But I think the power of this negotiation process will come when we have more time to really try to leverage it.
Thank you, Jay. Are there any other comments? I will entertain a motion. Father John?
Yes, I move to extend for 60 days the interpersonal violence investigator contract agreement.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion made by Hedges and seconded by Bertrand. Is there any further board discussion? Okay, we will go to a roll call vote.
Director Brent?
Yes.
Director Freeman?
Yes.
Director Bertrand?
Yes.
Director Hedges?
Yes.
Director Geis?
Yes.
Director Nguyen?
Yes.
Motion passes 6-0 with 1 recusal. Okay, thank you, everyone. At this time, we're going to move to item 4.3, the district code, or actually, I think we're going to, Jonathan, unless there's anything in particular that you feel is important to update us on COVID-19 before we do the budget discussion, I think in the interest of time, I might skip us to the budget discussion.
Yeah, we can skip. There's just a small thing with this one, but not a lot.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and go to the budget discussion, and we'll add George back.
Okay. Send him a quick text. Okay. Well,
okay, great. I just want to say at the outset, a big thank you to our finance committee, which is Director Bertrand, Director Geis, myself. Big thank you to our staff for the hard work that they put in, the meticulous work into this budget. And I think really just want to highlight that, and I'm excited for our full board to be able to hear it and provide input tonight. So thank you, and I'll hand it over to you, Jonathan, to introduce the budget for this coming year.
great. Let me share my screen. Okay, so budget for this year. If everyone had a chance to read the letter, I'll go over the major points, but it goes, really detailed through every single revenue and expenditure we have and our reserve analysis that we're required to do every year. So, I'm going to go over the major points on each section. This transmittal letter kind of does the job. So the revenues are about 1,361,608. At the end of the report, there's a section for adjustments for the budget. And so you can even see like what was the recommended budget that was noticed on June 8th. That was like the legal document we had to notice. Even those numbers changed from that to the budget letter that got posted Saturday. And then the numbers changed a little bit again today, just because we finally got the utility revenue this morning from some of the providers. So it was just things like that, it's minor changes. So at the end, there's a spreadsheet that kind of, you can approve the budget as amended, and it'll incorporate all these changes that I'm going to talk about. But overall, there's not a big change. It's just minor changes. And that's the first thing I want to highlight, is that our revenue is doing really well. That's why we kept, we delayed this budget approval, is to look at how the revenue was going to come in, to have a better estimate. But overall, it's pretty strong. It did dip a little bit, but it didn't dip, more than 30% at the extreme end, and just it even went up for other utilities. So, and then as I forwarded to the board, there's the Goleta Water District right now is discussing a rate increase, and so is Southern California Edison. And so if it continues to dip, we'll keep a look at those rate increases and changes in populations. But as of now, we feel pretty comfortable with the $940,000 from the utility tax. You can see it says 933 here, but it got adjusted because of the new numbers that came in. So that's another $100,000 increase pretty much from last year to this year, and from 200,000 pretty much from the year before almost. So our revenue's been growing. Besides that, everything's relatively the same, where we use the our leftover fund balance from IVCSD, and we fund the programs that we have their funding from. And then a new kind of revenue to this fiscal year is rent income for 970 Embarcadero Del Mar, if that lease were to take into effect that we're negotiating. So that hasn't happened yet, but we're going to budget for it because it's likely to happen. And if it doesn't, we'll readjust. But it's all important to budget that in right now. Our expenditures, right now, you can see that community programs is the highest percentage of our budget by far. It's almost half of our budget, actually. And so that's really, it shows where our priorities are. Public safety is 19%. Public works and graffiti abatement are 9%. Housing and parking 2%. Community planning and operations is at 25%. And then finally, as a major line item, is our fund balance contribution. Last year we had a general fund balance contribution of 100,000, and this year our finance committee and our board have talked about doing it specifically for our physical facilities that we're taking on, and making that a serious a serious commitment to their health as buildings. So that's the broad strokes. Right here, you'll see that our budget process was not as involved as previous years, and that's COVID-19's disruption of lifestyle and people's priorities did change things. So we didn't have as many respondents to the survey. We didn't have as many people come to our budget forum this year. But we did do some phone banking where we called IV residents and let them know about the budget process being underway. That was a new thing we did this year. And there's the community budget input report, which takes into account the budget survey. And so it's an interesting document. You can look at what our constituents think on the different services that we're able to provide. In terms of revenues, again, the utility tax, again, the budget letter, it was 933 when we wrote this, so it's a little higher now, but it's not that much higher. So you've got the utility tax, the UC Santa Barbara grant, which funds the safety stations and the interpersonal violence investigator. Those aren't funded by taxes. There's the residual fund balance for one. I just named them 1 and 2. It's the same thing in the budget spreadsheet, but one is the UC Santa Barbara grants for the 3 programs they funded us for, and the other one is the Compost Collective grant that we got from associated students. So that one's coming in this year, but mainly being spent next year, and then rent $142,000. I did want to confirm to our board members, because there was a question, is UCSB gonna stay in the building? And the answer is yes, as of yesterday, and that's why we're at the $142,000 rental income for that building. So any questions on revenue before we go to expenses? Okay. So expenditures, again, we have our 8 programs, really 7, and operations are, this is our basic program. It's my salary, Deborah's, Ross, our interns. These have pretty much been unchanged. They've gone up or down a little bit, but they're pretty much the same as last year. For our staff, for our communications, for our office, which office is a flexible term now. Like you can see, we might just buy some equipment for our employees at home if they need it, especially if we hire additional people later, compared to buying things for the physical office. But it's equipment for employees to do their jobs is what this one is for. Administrative is the only place where we had a big jump, and it's not that big of a jump, but it's $14,000 for our election. And so this is a cost we have every other year. So next year we won't pay for the election. The year after we will. And $14,000 is what our cost is going to be unless we ever put a ballot measure on. So that's for the 2 full-year seats and the 1 2-year seat that we'll have up every election. And the board stipends that we use to help make sure that everybody can participate on our board of directors. Next up is the community programs. I'm going to go into detail with this one because it's new and it's the biggest one, and it's one that's important to just understand where we're at and has some new information. So this is the first one, program 3000, the community center. The first thing to note, the first this part of the spreadsheet, these are the salaries for the 2 positions. Like we're not going to hire these 2 positions right away. Even maybe one of them 6 months into the year we won't hire, but we're going to budget the whole cost of them so that it's not a surprise next year when we end up having to put in the full cost. But so we're not going to spend this down all the way this year, but it's there for us to know, okay, this is how much it costs. It is cheaper than doing it with the grant, so that's again one of the advantages. And now we get that flexibility where we're not needing to hire someone right now because of the situation with the pandemic. So that's the 2 positions, the assistant general manager for community programs and the community engagement coordinator / the room coordinator. The rest of the budget for the community center, there's advertising, marketing expenses, furniture and fixtures as we need more equipment to make the building operational, grant writing. And this was a new priority from our finance committee this year, is to have a fund to hire grant writers to help us secure other grants and use the reserves that we have possibly to get matching funds or do anything like that. So we put some money in for that. we put some money in also for programming, which is, you know, same we had this year. And then the biggest change, the big, you know, is our utilities for the building. So these items that I've highlighted right here, I did not come up with these from scratch. You know, we used the county's numbers from the 2 buildings, plus, you know, just any changes we might anticipate. Like for janitorial, we added a lot extra for COVID cleaning in case we need it, if the buildings are getting used anymore. So the utility costs, though, are pretty much exactly what we originally guessed they would be. So that's good. They didn't surprise us at all. Lastly is building maintenance. So there's 2 different kinds of maintenance. There's the, you know, maintenance when something breaks on a weekly basis, and then there's the long-term maintenance of making sure the building as a whole is sound. So we have 10,000 for the everyday, day-to-day maintenance, just because when we looked at the historical numbers, that's what it looked like. There are some bigger projects, and so we're going to need to do those separately. And this 100,000 is our, you know, for sure commitment into our reserves on the, you know, long-term maintenance of the building, like the roof, the elevator, things like that. So that's the community center. And so before I even go later into this program, are we good on this one? Does everyone, you know, fully, you know, have their questions answered on this, or is there anything I can explain? Okay, great. So special projects, this is a continuing one. You know, we've actually had a lot of interest from people in asking us about how this is going to get used next year to, you know, let the community engage with us and propose projects to fund. So I think we'll hopefully get a lot of use out of this next year. We had plans this year, they didn't materialize because of COVID-19. Sexual assault services, continuing this one. New program development. There's a lot of new programs in this budget, and so there wasn't a need for new program development, and we didn't have room for it necessarily, but it's in there for the future if we ever decide to put money in there. Community garden, the board recently increased this budget to 19,000 from 12,000 before. It's been doing a great job. The compost collective, one of our newest programs, which is funded by a grant this year through the end of spring. They might need some additional equipment to improve their program, and we can talk about that at future meetings. But overall, they've been doing a great job. They're booked for the summer already for collecting compost, and we do need to figure out the long-term funding situation with them, and they're working really hard to figure that out with us. And I think our finance committee did say, correct me if I'm remembering wrong, you know, we eventually can just start helping them out with our tax revenue too, since it is part of our organization. But we'll figure that out as we go forward. They're good for this year, except for some capital or equipment that could help bolster their efforts. Next is the community festival, 55,000. Again, it's pending. We'll see if this is possible to happen in a year from now, but at least it's in our budget. So if we did want to do it, we wouldn't need to be drawing from other sources. We'd have the money ready to go in this line item. And if we didn't, we could use the money for something else. Next up, we're almost done, halfway through. The housing. So this one has gone down just a little bit, but Deborah's been doing a great job in building back our mediator capacity. And we'll get a part-time intern who does a little bit of work throughout the year, making sure that there's more visibility for the program. And so we'll give it another year to see where things go. You know, if we have more robust mediators and we have more robust outreach, will it increase utilization? We'll keep working on that. But the budget's gone down for this program slightly. Public safety, there has been not a lot of change here. The safety stations are not changing in cost. Neither is the investigator. The community policing pool, which is, you know, a general pool of money the board can allocate to projects to improve safety, is still the same. And then we added the media intern that the board voted to fund in this budget. So it's represented here. So that's the public safety budget. Parking, again, no change. Parking study, if we're able to make it happen this year, and advertising. And then public works, So Ivy Beautiful staying at 70,000, but we might be able to expand within that 70,000 still. 50,000 for lighting and other public infrastructure. That's remained the same. Public art has remained the same. And then lastly, and this is one where the original thought of funding would be 100,000. It's now down to 35,000. Would just to get started would be starting to look into doing the preliminary work for having an Isla Vista community plan and updating the master plan and getting to having an area planning commission. So that's initial money for us, and that can synergize with the parking study too and other efforts. And finally, the fund balance. As you see, this is all estimates. We'll have the real final numbers after June 30th, and when our audit comes through. But we're looking like we're going to end the year with $1 million in our fund balance. Part of it is for UCSB assigned fund balance, but for the most part, it's all of the funds that our policy said we needed to have are now funded. None of them need any more money. I mean, they can have more money in them, but none of them are out of compliance or out of what we said we wanted in them. And we actually have a surplus. We have a 74,000 undesignated fund balance this year, and next year potentially, well, it'll be 170. It'll be 74 again. The 100 is not, the 100 for the community center is not properly represented in here yet. But we'll continue to have a pretty robust fund balance. We're in a good place there. And then finally, the recommended edits to the budget. This is just a tally sheet between what got posted and what the live spreadsheet that are edits are made on there. So the live spreadsheet is the final product, and these just reflect the changes from what was noticed to that final product. And so we're going to vote to approve that final spreadsheet based on any other changes made today in the meeting. That's where we'll put them, and we'll reflect them on here, and we can approve the budget that way. So that's the budget. Does anyone have any final questions or anything as a whole?
I'm going to go to Ethan. You have a question?
Just a comment. I really want to commend our staff for working on this and putting together such a great budget. When I look at everything that we are doing, and to also think about how we're doing this in just our third year or so, we've really accomplished a lot. And looking at the various programs that we're funding, I think it's really a statement to our values as a board, how we've listened to the community about how we can make improvements that before were not possible with local funding. So I'm really impressed by this. Some highlights of what I see here are our continued investments in programs such as Isla Vista Beautiful, an innovative program where we are helping our neighbors experiencing houselessness as they serve the community. I'm so glad we're investing in that. I appreciate some of the flexibility that we have in this budget, such as with our CSO safety station program, having some room to adjust and perhaps build the program this next fiscal year. And additionally, I really want to commend us for our continued attention for the Isla Vista Community Center. I'm excited for us to get to put our dollars to work to program it and to open it and have a wonderful community resource. So thank you so much, and I'm really excited for us to pass this tonight.
Thank you, Director Bertrand. Are there other board members that would like to speak? I'll go to Director Freeman.
On the possibility to shift it with relation to program 5001 Isla Vista safety stations, the sentence, there is possibility to shift this program's budget to allow for a third safety station pending negotiations with UCPD. But by shift, we're talking about the kind of reorganization that I talked about when they had given the presentation about trying to change the extent to which they maintain capacity for extremely expensive escorts in order to get a third station. Or are we talking about shift, like add more money to it, or what do we mean by that?
Well, I don't think it means add more money. Just
okay.
What we heard at the last board meeting about this was that it would be nice to have a third station, and so shift means can we move bodies who are assigned to stations to increase coverage, but we haven't had that conversation yet. So we'll.
Yeah, that's the conversation that is the both this year, maybe more this year than last year, but also last year to come up with the idea of just being able to like shift the allocation of people, which they push back on some because of the way that they think about the way the escorts work. But yeah, but to the extent to which we're not trying to give them more money for that, that's cool. I don't want to necessarily try to take money away from them right now, although I mean that would be interesting. But
well, the other thing with this program is that we don't know, and we still need to figure out how it's going to work, if it will work in September, for example. It usually starts in August, but again, I think one separate discussion we're going to talk about, not tonight, but is, looking at how Isla Vista is going to look moving forward with the pandemic and different, we were in a locked state with leases this fiscal year, but not next year. So we'll see how things evolve. I mean, if it's empty in September, I don't know if we'll need exactly how this program usually gets delivered. Maybe.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Director Freeman. Are there other board members with comments on the budget?
Spencer, I'll make a comment.
Go ahead, Bob.
I just want to compliment the district staff and Spencer and Ethan, who's helped on prior budgets. I've looked at budgets for districts for a long time, and a lot of them are just services and supplies, payroll, and they really don't get down to programs and program level budgeting. And you guys have done a great job of just morphing into that and understanding in a really interesting way of how to do program budgeting and keep it simple and make it understandable. And I just want to commend you guys for doing that. And I'll say it wasn't my doing, it was your doing, that you guys intuitively knew how to do this and really related it then to your goals and objectives and the other things we're doing in the long-term planning process. So I just commend the district board and staff.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Bob. And thank you for when we first went down the road of program budgeting, letting us know that we could do that was an option available to us. I think we all at one time or another have looked at those district budgets and been a little bit confused by the lack of transparency of where exactly the money is going. So thanks for your help on that. Any other board members with comments on the budget? Okay, I'm not seeing anything, so I'll make a quick comment before we open the public comment period. I think that we're in a really fortunate position right now. Many other districts and public agencies across the state and across the country are looking at reduced revenues as a result of this pandemic. We've said it's not just a public health crisis, it's a financial crisis for all of our constituents, but for local governments and state governments that need to provide important services as well. So we're really lucky to not be in that position revenue-wise for this year and to be able to continue to provide quality services at the same and indeed at enhanced levels than we have in this past year. I think this is really the first budget where we have made what I think is our most significant investment to date, which is in public space in Isla Vista, committing money for our public buildings that we're in the process of negotiating for right now. I think that's incredibly important, and strikes me that many other government agencies aren't able to provide the same level of care and investment in their public spaces and buildings. And I think it's just really important that we've been able to do that with this budget. In addition to that, we still are ending up with a very healthy, fully funded reserves. Even if we were in a revenue crisis. We have fully funded reserves and more than enough revenue in fund balance to be able to weather a situation like that. And I think that's a testament to our board's slow approach to improving the community when it comes to not wanting to overcommit ourselves and really thinking about the long-term for Isla Vista. So I really thank everyone for that attitude. I think that it's served us well so far, and I think it will continue to serve us well. So with that, I'm going to open up the public comment period. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak? Okay, I'm going to go over to Andy.
Yeah, thank you. So I would like to voice my opposition to $250,000 spent towards community policing. So the phrase defund the police has become something that we as a public body have been thinking about and debating about. And I think that often we've understood that when we put so much money into police departments, we're not then putting those monies into schools or into healthcare or into helping the most marginalized of our community members. I think that that's clear. And I think that it's also clear that there is been 5 decades of public policy such that police have really inflated budgets. And the amount of money that we give to police is just a disproportionate amount given to how much we pay for other organizations or parts of the sort of community governance that is being underfunded. However, I think that one of the ways in which I find it really useful to think about this is that the police are really good at, as a bureaucratic entity, of trying to say why they need more money. Oh, it's very clear. Like, I understand that sometimes they have to deal with some really crisis-oriented events. I believe that, I would like police officers that know how to be trained in de-escalation. I really like the idea that they would have some sort of camera equipment so we can monitor their behavior. I really want to make sure that police are handled are trained to be able to handle interpersonal and sexual violence responsibly. However, what I get irritated about is the way in which they utilize these concerns that I care about, that you care about, so as to take finite public resources away from that we should be putting to other things, because the police have a really, 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 really big budget. The UCPD budget is $11 million. Okay, there has been a massive increase in the funds that have gone to these organizations at the same time that tuition has been going up. There is no reason to think that they should not be capable of having their own social media intern or being able to actually deal with the number one crime in our community, which is interpersonal and sexual violence. And so, I don't mean to call out Director Brandt, but Director Brandt made a really interesting comment in a couple meetings a couple weeks ago about that the IV Community Service District needs to do some myth busting. And I really kind of caught on to that, because for me, it seems like that y'all are too willing to believe in some of the myths about what police are doing in our community, and you're not listening to how they're targeting and making us feel very unsafe. And they're actually taking very finite public resources away from where they should be going. And it really sort of really bothers me that sometimes the IV Community Service District is now taking it upon themselves to become a propaganda arm for the police and to actually do social media work to say that that the police are doing a good job. And because we talk about community policing a lot, right? Community policing is another liberal word that everyone oh, that sounds good. It's, policing that takes into consideration community. But what community policing looks like in this instance is the police trying to utilize the community service district to promote them, as opposed to doing the sort of work that the community service district should be doing. So, you know, it is my position that the police have plenty of funds. In fact, they have way, way, way too many funds. And that the $250,000 should be spent towards community-based alternatives that are separate and autonomous. So I guess I have real skepticism about why the community service district is so focused upon contracting the UCPD to run a community service escort program. If you want to reduce the amount of money to be able for these walk homes, it'd be really easy if the IV Community Service District was running the CSO program, you know. And I guess I'm when I see all these contracts, whether it be to privatize security contractors to help with, you know, big events like Deltopia, or contracts with, you know, for the CSO program, I see that as kind of a refusal to build these programs ourselves. And so, you know, I know that the budget for new programs is at a zero, but I really hope that the community service district does some real thinking about what sort of new programs that could actually be separate and autonomous, and that are community based, that could solve some of the real harms in our community. I'm sorry for taking up so much space, and I really appreciate y'all for listening to my comments.
Thank you for your comments. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to bring it back to our board for any further board discussion. I'm going to go to Director Freeman.
So I would like to, well, not just begin. It's really the main thing I want to talk about is I want to kind of look at what Andy was talking about and kind of respond to a number of points. And it's kind of, so one thing it's kind of unfortunate. So the question about like, why are we contracting? We have this focus on contracting. There's this unfortunate aspect that our law that put us together doesn't actually let us just work on public safety. It actually weirdly only gives us the ability to work on, to contract for additional police protection from either the county sheriff or the university, the regents of the University of California, essentially through their UCPD program. And so I think that's why, for what it's worth, you see this extreme focus in some sense that we have on contracting. Now, I would love to get to a point where we actually have the ability to do some of these things more ourselves, and whether that means that we need to get some kind of law tweak or to just give us that incremental extra power, whether that's something, and I haven't actually looked into this and I should, whether that's something that is sufficiently available inside of the normal CSD set of powers that we could activate through a LAFCO process, or whether we need to try to figure out how to eventually become a city or something. I don't know, but I would love to try to figure out how to move away from this model where we're kind of stuck with the idea of, well, we have to pay for it as a contract from one of these two entities, neither of which might be perfect. And for what it's worth, and that's also where I start to the extent to which it's a good idea, and I think that we haven't discussed at the board level. I'm not really going to comment on whether it's a good idea or not right now. But it got brought up during this budget discussion about, or at least during one of the earlier discussions. It happened today. Is the idea of contracting with somebody like Guardians in order to do safety? It's not even clear to me that that's legal for our district to do, given the way that our law actually worked out. And we haven't ever asked our lawyer yet. He's got to comment on that. But it's interesting that we run into these limitations on what we're able to do. And so when we have to go through the UCPD and they have the CSO program, and that's the closest thing we can figure out to get that doesn't actually have trained officers in uniforms with guns, at least it's people wearing blue t-shirts that are students. There's some benefits to there, but they're also, I totally appreciate all the complaints people have brought up for this meeting, necessarily not as much during this meeting, but about the ways in which CSOs fit into that. The 250 number is interesting because I think there was a misunderstanding. And so we are spending, and by the way, it is funny, by the way, that I'm the person who's sitting here now defending this aspect of the budget. I mean, if nothing, I'm the person who might just try to slash it or something. But the 250, for what it's worth, is just for public safety in general. We have a $30,000 budget for community policing. The 250 is what's been allocated towards public safety completely. And there's this problem, which is, and this is another thing, is that the goal of this budget is to, in some sense, it has to reflect the reality of our expenses. So in the case of, for example, the interpersonal violence investigator, unless we believe that we're going to cut the contract, and we just agreed that we were going to increase it for 60 days with the likelihood of continuing for the rest of the year. The budget has to include 150 for interpersonal violence investigator because we're kind of are on the hook to spend it. And that's when the safety stations aren't even up for renewal right now. So the budget has to have the $60,000 for the Isla Vista safety stations because we're on the hook to spend it. So the question really becomes, if we were to make any changes to the budget today, it would either be that we wanted to allocate more money towards something right now, or we wanted to change the community policing or social media intern budgets, and those are only $42,000 total of the $253,000 that have been allocated towards public safety. And then to look at those, and it's like I already mentioned a little bit about the community policing one, but I'll mention it. There's been thoughts that have been put on the table that we somehow would be able to not spend that on the cops, although I don't really know how we would not spend it on cops, but it hasn't been directly allocated yet. And so I think that this is in some sense a challenge to the community to figure out how we can, because it is worded in the I agree, by the way, with Bob, that Bob was saying, there's like the work by staff on making this understandable is just so glorious. It's worded here as, reduce the need for armed law enforcement. And to the extent to which we can figure out how to allocate $30,000 towards lowering the number of armed law enforcement, I think that's an interesting challenge to the community. And if no one shows up with a way for us to do that, we haven't said how we're going to do it. And so the $30,000 wouldn't get spent. So I'm currently comfortable with the $30,000, although I do agree with this idea that if we had other things we wanted to stick in the budget, do something with that. The social media intern one is an interesting one. And Andy's point about how we essentially start turning into where we're not only paying for something that's going to the sheriff's department, but we're actually paying for, in some sense, let's just use a brutal word for a second. We're paying for the propaganda arm of the police department, and that is, I think, kind of weirdly concerning that we're taking the $12,000 and kind of applying it into their budget, under their control, in order to allow them to sit and work on making themselves look better to the community in a time when is that the thing we really want to have happen? Now, this might be another example, though, where we're kind of on the hook for it. I mean, this is the argument that we already had months ago, and the board voted to fund it. I think in past, I mean, it was weird, right? Because we agreed to fund it already, but we couldn't fund it already because they didn't even want it yet. But I think this might be another one where we're already on the hook. But I maintain that I would love to see this be more expensive. I mean, I would like to see allocating at least $30,000 to having a position in-house where we have somebody who is a social media community manager, and somebody who essentially, that we need the community manager position you see from like startup internet companies whose job is to do forum management and user engagement, and like the kind of person who would make certain that there's a lot of that when our agendas come out, that they're bringing our agendas on various social media platforms, or try to get feedback on items so that we end up getting like a report from the community when we are beginning our meetings on these things, as opposed to requiring people to end up showing up at the meeting or to do these things. Like, I mean, there's so many opportunities we could have for an actual in-house community manager, which the terminology sometimes that's used, but it's not even the really position I want. Public information officer. I think there's the idea of having a community manager in-house is really powerful. And I pointed out before that there's so many things other than police that we have the same sorts of needs for. And I think that when you try to say, well, we'll have one for police and we'll have one separate, like for the other things, I don't think that the cost amortizes correctly. I pointed out before specifically public works and public health as examples where I think that this comes up. And even actually the day that was happening when we last had the argument, and I pointed out the whole thing with public health happened to be, turns out I I'd received text messages about this, but I hadn't read them yet until after the meeting, that there was currently on the UC Santa Barbara subreddit arguments going on about the beginning of all of the COVID-19 stuff and miscommunication that was going on. And Britta, who I had mentioned, who's been really keen on trying to have more community management in the area and was helping me with the plans for a PIO position years ago. She was sitting there as one of the moderators on that subreddit, essentially trying to maintain, some semblance of truth there. And I think that's the kind of thing that the CSD should really be in a position to do. And I would love to see if anyone else would support the idea of shifting this budget item out of public safety and into communications, and we could initially do it for safety because we've only 12,000 right now, but then to try to expand it over time later to include to include public health and public works. And public works is one. Right now, even we're getting the communication from Brittany Heaton at the county about all things related to sidewalks. There's so much, I think, information that comes out of the public works department that I have myself spent time occasionally trying to format for the public, and I think that we could do. But I'm not expecting to get any other support for this position, and so I will vote for this. But if other people are interested in changing it, you've got to vote for me if you want to shift this line item out. But again, I'm expecting that I'm going to be one of 7 who's interested in making this change, and so let's just go for it.
Hey Jay, I just want you to know that position is in the budget already.
Well, that position is in the So let me find it again. Communication.
Jonathan, for the benefit of the public, can you just briefly explain what you're talking about?
Yeah, Jay, we went over this a couple board meetings ago with the restructuring of the community center staff, because we were spending
community center staff. That's right.
Yeah, it's not, the positions aren't spelled out. They actually are spelled out in this right here in the share screen. So what we're doing is, instead of having the director of the community center and the assistant director of the community center, where we were thinking like, oh, we might not need 2 positions just focus on like programming events at the building. One of the positions the assistant director one, will morph into a community engagement coordinator position that we hire sooner. And some of their jobs will be to engage with the public, to schedule our public space. And that's a great avenue for them to get in touch with people. But then a lot of their other duties will be like what you just talked about, like engaging on social media, making sure the community knows what we're doing. There's a job description, a couple agenda items back I can send you, that kind of lays out like it is what the role you described would be, this community engagement coordinator.
Okay.
So that's funded in here already, $50,000.
Great. I had lost it in here because it is like the combination position. I remember the discussions about the idea of us trying to be able to get something like that, but I didn't actually understood that it's in here. So great.
So you don't have this one. You've got the finance committee recommendation behind it.
All right, cool. I am very,
and
I guess I will just say I hope that it ends up actually succeeding and being able to do, because the community manager type thing I keep talking about is it's a complicated thing to do well, and it takes a lot of time and effort. And so hopefully this works, but I'm excited that other people were excited to have it in here. So yes, it was good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jay.
Hire this position soon, and we'll get to work.
We are similarly excited, and thank you for continuing to advocate for such a position. I have the utmost confidence that you and the rest of our board will continue to provide oversight to make sure that it lives up to what we expect it to be. Are there any other board members that have comments on the budget?
Spencer, one more thing I'll mention, just because this has come up recently from community members, is I'm pleased to see our continued investment in public art. That was something that we've also budgeted for in this last year and haven't initiated yet, but I think there's a lot of great potential in that.
We actually have a lot of people ready to submit proposals for this item, so we're ready to go to spend it this year.
Fantastic, can't wait.
Thank you for that, Ethan. Any other comments?
I guess I'm curious to know if there is this notion that the community policing budget could be used to hire somebody. I mean, like it's mentioned, for example, I mean, I think even earlier in this meeting, the idea of guardian, for example. Since we've got Ross on this call, is that even something? Can we even do that? You're on mute, Ross.
I'll try unmuting him myself. Maybe it's locked or something. Okay. Yeah, it seems to be locked. I can't unmute him even from my console.
Not even Jonathan.
Yeah, let me try one more time.
Star 6 on your phone.
Yeah, try star 6 on your phone.
There we go. That's a very good question, and I always appreciate the situations where board members like Director Freeman refer back to the authorizing statute for the district. And the language that's provided in Government Code Section 61250 about the district's powers is to contract with the County of Santa Barbara, with the Regents of the University of California, or both, for additional police protection services to supplement the level of police protection services already provided by either the County of Santa Barbara or the Regents of the University of California within the area of the district. That is very specific language that we have to give effect to, which is police protection services. This is a specific limitation on a power that is available to community services districts, and there are some districts that are police protective districts. That's their primary function, is the provision of police services. And what is entailed by that is much more akin to what one would normally expect from a city, an unlimited local government, as opposed to the limited government that's provided by the CSD. And the language in 61250 is limiting, that the district does not have the ability under California law to exercise powers other than those specifically enumerated. So with the provision of police protection services spelled out and limited in subsection G3, that is what governs the provision of police protection services. That is not necessarily what has been discussed this evening about some of the programs mentioned by the public and other directors. And in fact, it's in many cases the antithesis of police protection services. So there would need to be some other power set forth in 61250 that better describes, more accurately describes, what it is that the board might consider as an acting as a service under one of its powers here. Obviously, it's not acquiring, constructing, improving, or maintaining sidewalks or other public facilities. It doesn't have to do with contracting for code enforcement services. It doesn't have to do with a mediation program or a district, and these are all powers that are enumerated in subsection G for anybody who wants to look this up. Again, it's Government Code Section 61250, and I've been reading from various subdivisions in subsection G. One of the most, I think, flexible powers is that's described in subsection D, which talks about community facilities. When the district in the past has enacted certain services or programs, they have been directly connected to some type of a facility. For example, renting out a portion of the community room building for interpersonal violence counseling is an example of using one of the set powers on providing access and control over community facilities to facilitate the provision of another service. As the district's governing law is written, there isn't anything that it really jumps out to me that would specifically authorize some of these other non-police related public safety types of programs that have been brought up. That isn't to say that with a little bit more study, options could not be presented, but as it sits right now, there's nothing that specifically authorizes those types of programs. It would require more in-depth research into these different powers, as well as the powers that are latent, which are those that can be requested by the district via the LAFCO process. If there is a latent power that more specifically and better describes these types of programs, that fully embraces the types of programs that the board has discussed tonight and members of the public have brought up, then more likely my advice would be to go through the LAFCO process to have that activated, rather than trying to make it work through something that is less specific, that is in the board's governing statute 61250. A little bit of a roundabout answer, but I wanted to make sure to be complete, to say I don't think that there's something necessarily right there. We can look more into it, and by necessity that would require an analysis of the other latent powers to make sure that there isn't something that specifically controls. If there isn't something that specifically controls as a latent power, we can explore creative ways with the options that are available under 61250. Otherwise, if there is a specific latent power, the appropriate thing to do would be to go through the LAFCO process.
Thank you so much for being so explicit in that answer. I guess one follow-up at the very end of that is my vague understanding is that if we were to activate a latent power in order to get something, that it would we wouldn't be able to use our existing funding source for that new power. We would have to, because the tax was allocated, was authorized by the public in the vote for the powers we had at the time, and that if we just activated a new power, we'd have to find a new funding source for it.
I don't think that the district would need to find a new funding source because the 61250 contemplates the enactment of a utility user tax to fund its operations. And there is the language at the bottom of 61250 in, let me call it back up here, in subsection L, that talks about how the district can seek activation of other powers via the normal LAFCO process, which is the Cortez-Knox-Hertzberg Local Government Reorganization Act of 2000, which is Government Code Section 56,000. And so because that is included as the method by which IVCSD should petition to seek to have powers activated, it would be my position and argument that that embraces the notion of funding those added services through the existing UUT, through the budget process that the district is engaged in right now.
Thank you so much for that clarification. That's actually really good to know, and it's helpful for a lot of thoughts we've been having. So to kind of take it back then to the immediate discussion of this budget and these various line items, and for example, Program 5003. Given the context of what we've just heard from Ross, I'm curious to know the extent to which everyone is still excited about having the $30,000 community policing budget and how it might apply towards what our goals are with respect to reducing the need for law enforcement responses and how we might think about doing it.
Spencer, George?
Yes, George, go
ahead. I'd like to make a motion that we approve the proposed fiscal year 2021 district budget. And I know we're going to have plenty of time to discuss details as we go forward, but hearing no motion regarding Jay's proposal, I'd like us to move on with this item. We have a long real property negotiation ahead of us.
Okay, there's been a motion made by Thurlow. Is there a second?
I'll second Bertrand.
Can we make the motion as amended so we can make sure we get?
Yeah, that's friendly.
Okay, so a motion made by Thurlow and seconded by Bertrand. Is there any other discussion on the budget? I know Director Freeman had a question, and I think I don't know if I necessarily have any comments on it. I think I'm comfortable with where we're at now, and I think what we have provides us some flexibility with that line item. And I think the point was brought up earlier that if we don't figure out a program, then it's not like that money gets spent on something. It just sits there and then eventually goes back into residual fund balance. Overall, I'm very proud of the budget that staff has put forward and excited to move forward with it, and appreciate the discussion we've had here tonight.
Thank you for that response, and particularly thank you for the underscoring of the idea that if we don't find a way of utilizing it within that premise, that we will not use it. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any other discussion? All right, seeing none, we're going to go ahead and move to a roll call vote.
Hey, Director Brandt?
Yes.
Director Freeman?
Yes.
Director Thurlow?
Yes.
Director Bertrand?
Yes.
Director Hedges?
Yes.
Director Geis?
Yes.
Director Nguyen?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone, for your attention to this. Really excited for what this year has ahead. And thanks, everyone, for being flexible. COVID-19 threw us a wrench when it came to outreach and engagement. But I think I'm still really proud of what we were able to put forward this year. So thanks for your participation today. Okay, I'm going to move back up on the agenda to item 4.3, the district COVID-19 response, and hand it over to Jonathan.
Yeah, again, nothing major here to report. The only thing is that if we wanted to continue the Homeless Services Center with the meal distribution, the funding for that has run out. And so if we wanted it to continue, we would need to fund the meals ourselves, and that would be around $720 for the month of July. So, that's for 1 month, moving, it could be a recurring cost. So just wanted to bring that to your attention that funding has run out from the other sources. And so it is, they didn't make like a formal request for funding, but it's more like, are we interested in funding it to keep it going? So that's the main update. There's nothing else COVID related that relates to the district that I can think of right now.
Question for you, Jonathan. Right now, what are our numbers of attendance like for the hours that we operate the Homeless Service Center? Is it similar to what it had been at the launch?
It's like maybe a little lower. It's like 30 for sure now. I think it was like more 40 consistently before. Now it's like 30. And that's where the 720 comes from. It's $3 a meal times 30 people times twice a week times 4 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Got it. And do you, from what you're observing, think that the meal is a big draw to those folks coming to receive service?
I mean, I think it's the only reason all those people are there. Or it's the main reason. It's 90% reason.
Right.
Yeah.
And while they are there, they're getting additional service on top of the food, right?
Yeah, and that's the coordinated entry strategies. They'll,
Totally. Yeah. So with that in mind, I definitely am supportive of us maybe at our next board meeting coming back with something solid to approve, but tonight giving you direction to continue this. That's my position.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and we technically, you know, the 700 is like within my spending limit. So if that's something everyone was, you know, wanting
Spencer,
to do it.
Spencer, George, Spencer.
Go ahead, George.
You know, I'm comfortable making a motion right now to approve this for the next 2 months, and we take it out of Jonathan's travel budget.
Yeah, we have money for it.
Just kidding.
I'm not traveling next year. Trust me. I don't want to. You can't force me.
No, I'd like to, you know, $700. You know, I'll make a motion that we commit to it for the next 2 months, and then Jonathan comes back to us with sort of a working plan.
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you. We've got a motion from Director Thurlow, seconded by Director Bertrand. Are there any other board members who have comments?
Is it noticed on the agenda that we can do this?
Yes, it says we can take action as necessary in regards to Homeless Services Center.
I don't have a copy of the agenda, sorry.
No problem.
That's a good point. Good point.
Okay, I'm going to open it up for public comment. Any members of the public have comments on this? Okay, then I'll bring it back to our board. I think that this is a great thing for us to do in continuing to promote the coordinated entry program during these very difficult times of the pandemic, especially for our houseless neighbors. And I've been really impressed with how effective the program has been. I've got, you know, good attendance that continues to be there. And I just think it's important that we continue those services. So big thank you to the United Way and Home for Good Collaborative for all of their work with our houseless community. Any other comments from the board? Okay, with that, we'll go to a roll call vote.
Great, and I just wanted to clarify, was the second Bob? That's what I had down.
Second was Ethan.
Was Ethan, okay, great. Okay, so the roll call is Director Brandt?
Yes.
Director Freeman?
Yes.
Director Thurlow?
Yes.
Director Bertrand?
Yes.
Director Hedges?
Yes.
Director Geis? Last Bob? And Director Nguyen?
Yes.
Great.
Okay, motion passes unanimously, I think. We got a yes from Bob.
I thought I saw, Bob, did you say yes? I thought I heard.
I did say yes.
Okay.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for the update, Jonathan, and we look forward to more. Okay, we're going to move to item 4.5, Resolution 20-10 for the November 3rd, 2020 general election candidate statements.
This is just a routine follow-up to the last resolution we passed. Just some bureaucratic things got involved. So this is just redoing what we did already. So,
okay.
And Jonathan, do you want to mention the update to the form?
Oh yeah, there's just a blank space I didn't fill out on here. That just, you know, first page it'll say Isla Vista Community Services District Director. Yeah, and also just wanted to note that it's actually not even our choice to pay for candidate statements anymore, even if we wanted to help, you know, people run for office, because there's a new state Supreme Court case that doesn't allow us to do that anymore. So it has to be the candidate. I went ahead and put 400 to let them make a better case to the public.
Thank you, Jonathan. And yes, thank you for doing that. I think that the longer limit is better. Any other board discussion or motions? Go to Director Freeman.
We might not know the answer to this, and barring knowing the answer to this, I'm happy doing whatever, like the one we have here. But well, I paid close attention to the Park District discussion about this, and one of the things that they were looking at, which they didn't seem to know the exact answer to either, but they had some reason to believe that when you chose 400, what it did is it allocated more space in the book for the box for it, and then the person who put the candidate statement in had to pay more in order to get the candidate statement with the bigger box. I wasn't certain if, does anyone actually remember how this worked when they ran? Like, did you have to, does this sound even remotely correct? Like, is it actually cheaper for the candidates if we choose 200 if they want a statement, but they're limited? Or like, how does this work?
The way it works is that they charge, well, every Santa Barbara, every county elections does it differently, but the way ours does it is they charge you for like the full page. And then based on how many candidates run and take out statements, they'll refund you after the election, the cost. So it's really, you have to pay the full price of the page no matter what at the beginning.
Well, the candidate does.
The candidate does, yeah.
Okay, so it doesn't, all right, cool. Then this is great. I like the idea of giving people more space. I like the idea, but although one of the things that actually, one of the interesting discussions that the Park District people brought up is that to make an argument maybe why you don't want to do it, like even support it. Because is one of our options that we're allowed to say that we don't allow candidate statements, or is it just 200 or 400?
I don't think it's an option.
All right, okay, cool. All right, great.
Yeah,
there was just so much conversation at the Park District, but they weren't entirely certain what was actually what the actual scenarios were, and it was very interesting. But it was, yeah. So okay, great. Let's do 400. I love it.
Thank you, Jay. Any board members have motions or other questions? If not, I would entertain a motion.
I have a question for council. Those of us who are going to be candidates in this upcoming election, do you advise that we abstain from participating in this vote?
No, you don't need to abstain in participating in this vote. You don't get any specific benefits to one way or the other. You have the same benefit that all members of the general public would have, regardless. The board is required to take this action in order for the elections division of the county to process what it needs to process to actually have the election for these board seats. So you're required to do it by law, and two, you don't get any special benefit that does not also accrue to the general public, both of which are exceptions to the conflict of interest rules.
If that were a problem, the Park District would have been screwed because they had all 5 people up for election. So,
well, thank you, council, for that clarification. I just wanted to make sure that was clear for everyone.
Thank you, Director Bertrand. Are there any other questions? All right, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move approval of resolution number 20-11.
It's 10 now.
Oh, 20-10. Okay. I will move the approval of resolution 20-10 and with the addition of the title of elected office on the form.
I will second.
All right. Motion made by Bertrand and seconded by Freeman. Any public comment on the motion? Any further board discussion? All right, we'll move to a roll call vote.
Hey, Director Brandt?
Yes.
Director Freeman?
Yes.
Director Thurlow?
Yes.
Director Bertrand?
Yes.
Director Hedges?
Yes.
Dr. Geis,
Yes.
Dr. Nguyen.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. All right. Now we're going to move to resolution 20-11, which is the record retention policy.
Great. This one is a
So,
long time coming. We've been talking about this one for a while, but we are finally making it happen now. And so Ross and William did a really great job preparing this and working with Deborah to figure out the right composition of records that we have and making sure that it's reflective of reality. And so they've done a great job on this, and our policy committee met about this and had some changes to make that we incorporated. And those changes were mainly making some records permanent, which are like our minutes and our agendas and any staff reports, things that people can use to follow like the story of what we've done over the years. So we made that change to make those things permanent. So yeah, that's the only change our policy committee had, and this is going to be something Deborah's going to take more of a lead on. It's one of her original job description duties was maintaining our records and things like that. So if Deborah, you want to mention anything about this resolution and policy, please do. But otherwise, we're ready to go to start implementing this after we pass it.
No, I think it's just been a long time coming. We have a lot of activity going on, so we're generating records that we want to retain, information that we're going to want to use as we go forward to further develop programs and funding for the same. So nope, we're ready to go. Thank you, Ross, and thank you, William.
I'll move approval of resolution 2011.
I will second.
Motion made by Thurlow, seconded by Freeman. I'll say a big thank you to our staff and to the policy committee for putting this together. And are there any other board comments on this item? Any public comments? All right, we'll bring it back to the board for a roll call vote.
Director Brandt?
Yes.
Director Freeman?
Yes.
Director Thurlow?
Yes.
Director Bertrand?
Yes.
Director Hedges?
Yes.
Director Geis?
Yes.
Director Nguyen?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. Okay, with that, we are going to move straight into reports, and then we'll come back and do closed session after the fact. So we'll start off with reports from members of the board. Any members of the board have reports they'd like to give?
Yes, if I may, Spencer, I just want to give an announcement, which is many of you may have followed a couple of months ago when shortly after many people got stimulus checks, economic assistance as a result of COVID-19. We had a lot of concerns about what about our undocumented community. And I just wanted to put out there that the state did create an economic assistance program, which provides $500 per individual adult for up to $1,000 per family. But there's only 1 week left for undocumented individuals in our community to take advantage of that if they haven't already. The local community organization that is coordinating this relief program for Santa Barbara County and Ventura County is MyCop. And I've also been in touch with Isla Vista Youth Projects about this because I know that they're doing a lot of work in this area. So just I would ask that everyone spread the word because there is that timetable for this assistance. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Bertrand, for that important information. Any other reports from members of the board? With that, I'll just give a quick report. We got guidance from, or more detailed plans from Chancellor Yang in regards to the university's operations come fall quarter. And I think that now that that guidance is out there, a large chunk of our community is going to be able to make and adjust their plans for the rest of the year, for the fall and onward. And hopefully that provides them with some more certainty. And I think that one of the things we've heard a lot from the community is the need for everyone in the public, all of our stakeholders, from business owners to nonprofit leaders to student groups, to us as government officials, to have a little bit of an idea of what that's going to look like for Isla Vista. So I think that what we should do is work on a survey of our community to try and figure out what the plans are, get some empirical data that we can stand behind. And I think that will really assist us in our planning as well. So I've spoken with some students, particularly the new EVPLA, Yasmin Solari, about this, and I think there's a lot of interest in it. So just wanted to throw that out there because I think in terms of trying to get a grip on what exactly the next couple of months are going to look like, that's a really important thing. So wanted to put it on everyone's radar. With that, I will move from reports to reports from standing and ad hoc committees. We had our finance committee report tonight with the budget. Policy committee gave us a policy. I don't know if there's any other committee reports. I think we're going to move to 6.3, report from district council.
Nothing to report.
All right, thank you, Ross. We'll go to report from general manager.
Great. So, you know, most of my work and report was centered around what we did with the budget and the work group in the last 14 days at this point. But other things that are on the horizon and that have happened in the last since the last board meeting are the safe parking program should be ready to launch pretty soon. We're thinking July 6th is when we'll be able to start operating it. So that's pretty fast from when we approved it, less than a month. IVRPD reached out to me about how we could provide help to their bathroom management through Isla Vista Beautiful that they'd be willing to pay for if we operated. So that's something to, you know, just came up, but putting on your horizon before we keep looking into it. Another thing is, I think I shared last time that we weren't able to even apply for a transportation planning grant that had come up through the county, but through trying to apply for that one and not being able to make it, we found a even more broad grant that's, you know, higher amount of funding the county is gonna apply for Isla Vista with our involvement. And so I'll give you more information. I just received the information about it in the last day or so, so I'll keep you updated on that, but it seems really promising. Another thing is with the Isla Vista Community Center, we won't need a special closed session today because the progress that we were anticipating didn't happen. But the progress that did happen was that our lease, the current lease we have, wasn't extended, but we were just are being held over moving forward just until we can finish the other negotiations. So we're good to go staying at the community center as a tenant after June 30th because our lease does end then. And I did mention that UCSB is staying at 970 Embarcadero Del Mar, so they'll be in our building with us still. And then lastly, I did want to mention that we did have a staff training line item that we didn't fully use, but we used it a bit last week with Juneteenth and the educational events that were going on then. Our staff all had the opportunity to attend those. Our hourly staff had the opportunity to attend those and get paid as training for 2 hours. And so some of them did that, and we haven't done a lot of professional development with our staff, but trying to do more, and that was one opportunity that was there for them to take. So that's the report from me. Deborah, if you have anything, please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for the report.
Spencer, I have a question for Jonathan. George.
Go ahead, George.
So I got more calls in the last week about the conditions in Isla Vista than I've ever gotten before. And people who have regularly been engaged in Isla Vista were really taken aback by the conditions of the community. I mean, really reacting strongly. So, Jonathan, can you just give me a quick, I don't want an agenda item here and our council will cut us off if we get too far, but can you give me a quick update on how are we going to make sure this doesn't happen again?
Well, I don't know what you're referring to. Like, which condition?
Trash, furniture, everything dumped into the streets. Are people just overreacting and calling me, or?
I think so. Deborah and I both toured the streets multiple times, and like we've been good with keeping in touch with Marburg and the county on move out, because it's been, it is a different kind of year, no gift sale, and I actually think it was cleaner this year than last year. Like last year looked truly like a disaster zone on DP around this time, and it doesn't this year, and it does at certain points, but I have personally been impressed, and I didn't think I was going to be, with how fast some things have been picked up. And so I think trash is accumulating fast in a day, but it's getting picked up like quickly. So I think the situation still is not good, and it's gonna have to be improved. Like we reported at the last meeting on Move Out, like we're gonna keep working on this, but I don't think this year was a complete twice as
disaster
last year.
Okay,
That's
good.
I wouldn't say
that's good to hear. That's good to hear, and I'll convey that back to people.
George, I did actually an IV walkthrough. I walked the entire length of DP, and then I ended up walking about 3.5 miles throughout, back and forth through the streets. And actually, I was surprised at, again, how well they have stepped up, I think, this year because of some of their commitment to do so. And then I think they're really trying to make an effort at building a better relationship with the Community Services District and the Compost Collective Group, and just all of the different Waste Summit programs that we've talked about, the C-Click Fix. I just think that we're working on creating a real synergy there. And I think it's much better this year than it has been in the past.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So when you talk about that, are you talking about Marburg?
Yes, and the county.
Okay. That's great. That's really, really good news to hear. I should have gone out there, but nobody wears masks out there.
I did.
That's a different problem.
Yeah.
Anyway,
got a mask right over there, George.
All right. No, thank you, Jonathan. That's really, really good to hear. And I'll convey that back because, like I said, I've been getting calls from people and surprising calls. So I'll report back that the situation has been really, really much better than in years past.
Yeah, I would take a drive now. Like if you drove down the 6-5 area, where I'm living and where I took a walk earlier before the meeting, it was pretty clean.
Okay, I'll do that tomorrow.
Yeah, and just one last note is that, and we didn't mention this, but Deborah worked with Ivy Beautiful yesterday to make sure that things in the gutters are getting cleaned out that aren't picked up by Marburg.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks to Ivy Beautiful. That's a good program.
Thank you, everyone. Okay. With that, since we don't have a closed session item, we're going to end the meeting. Our next meeting is going to take place on July 14th, right here on Zoom virtually, and I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Made by Freeman. Is there a second?
All second, Bertrand.
All right. Any public comment? Any board discussion?
only comment I'll give
All
you
right.
is that I might need to ask you all for a quick 30-minute max special meeting on Zoom on like Monday for like any last bills that come in that we need to pay that need board approval. But it'll be very fast and really prepared.
Okay, thank you for the heads up. Okay, with that, we'll do a roll call vote.
Director Brandt?
Yes.
Director Freeman?
Yes.
Director Thurlow?
Yes.
Director Bertrand?
Yes.
Director Hedges?
Yes.
Director Geis? And Director Newman?
Yes.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We will see you in the future. Take care.
Thank you, staff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Good
everyone.
call,
Take care.
y'all.
See you in the
Right.
future.